Good evening, everyone. I like rhetorical questions that are answered. Yeah. Good evening. My name is John Herron. I'm proud to serve as the Director and Chief Executive of the Kansas City Public Library, and I want to welcome and thank you for joining us this evening, whether you're here in person or whether you're joining us on our live stream. This is a night when I, and indeed everyone at the library, are especially proud of what we do, which is to serve our community as a place for public discourse, for the civil exchange of ideas on difficult cultural and political issues and concerns. And we're very privileged to do that tonight with one of our closest community partners, the Urban League of Greater Kansas City. Our collaboration goes back more than a decade together, when, as part of the library's signature public events series, we examined the state of Black Kansas City, discussing studies of equality conducted by Gwen Grant and her local Urban League colleagues. In other programs, we explored issues of implicit bias and unconscious stereotypes. And with the emergence of COVID, we looked at the role of the pandemic in worsening the digital divide in Kansas City and its impact on African Americans and other disadvantaged populations here and across the country. Homeownership, inequalities, and redlining have highlighted additional programming that we have done together. Well, tonight, we join the Urban League in addressing another issue critical to our times, the discriminatory policing so powerfully underscored by the killing of George Floyd. Now, more than 2 years later, our country is still struggling to respond, still trying to transform our criminal justice system. We're not here tonight just to spotlight concerns. It is our hope that we can move forward with community contributions. The Urban League has drawn up thoughtful, workable solutions, its 21 pillars for redefining public safety and restoring the community trust. To help lead us through this discussion, it is my pleasure to introduce Gwen Grant, who has served as President and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Kansas City. She's emerged as one of the most passionate advocates for social justice and economic empowerment for African Americans and for women in our city, in our region, and in our state. Gwen is a recipient of the National Urban League's Whitney M. Young Leadership Award for advancing racial equality, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference's Community Service Award, and the William Yates Medallion for Distinguished Service from William Jewell College. The Kansas City Area Transportation Authority presented Gwen with its very first Rosa Parks Award for her tireless work for equality and social justice. She has been a difference maker in our community, and it is my pleasure to welcome Gwen back to the library.
Good evening. Thank you, John, for that really nice introduction, and thank you all for being here with us tonight for this very important conversation. I am delighted to be back at the library with our long-term partners as we do our best to lift up important issues for our community and provide opportunities to engage around, and tonight, the issue of redefining public safety and rebuilding community trust. So I'm not going to belabor the point tonight. We have a very robust agenda, a fast-paced agenda, and I would invite those of you who are in the back, if you don't mind, to come down and make this a more intimate conversation. We would sincerely appreciate that. We have a number of people joining us via live stream tonight as well. I am honored. I also want to thank many of our partners who have worked with us along the way as we began our fight for justice and equity in law enforcement in Kansas City. Back in 2019, we formed a police accountability task force. We began our work prior to the murder of George Floyd because we discovered that in Kansas City, there was a rising a trend of law enforcement, excessive force, and deadly force against African Americans and Latinos in our community. And we were finding that police officers were killing Black men with impunity. We called our Jackson County prosecutor to the table and began to talk about how we can address this problem more effectively, how we can arrive at equal justice under the law. If a police officer kills a person and breaks the law, he or she should be held equally accountable as we are held accountable if we break the law. We challenged her because we felt that she was not bringing enough prosecutions against law enforcement. And we invited her to join us on a civil rights journey to Montgomery, Alabama. And we talked about the history, the systemic and structural racism in America, from slavery to mass incarceration, and the importance of knowing the history. How did we get here? Because without that knowledge, we can't figure our way out. How do we solve these problems? History informs the present, and certainly how we respond to what we learn about our past positions us to write a better future for our community. So I want to thank the members of our Police Accountability Task Force. I want to thank the members of our civil rights community. I see Bishop James Tyndall here tonight, who is the founder of the Urban Summit. We meet every Friday morning, and we grapple with the issues that plague our African American community and work towards building solutions to address socioeconomic parity in our community. And I want to thank the NAACP, the SCLC, our civil rights leaders who form what we call our Urban Council, and we convene on a regular basis to work on policy and systems change for our community. And I also want to uplift the young activist community that started 2 years ago with us back in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, and you'll hear from one of those young activists later when we have our panel discussion, Ryan Surreal, who's one of the co-founders of Black Rainbow and the founder and executive editor of the KC Defender. So I now, without further ado, will move forward and introduce my leader at the National Urban League, Marc H. Morial. Marc has been CEO of the National Urban League since 2002. He came along shortly after I became CEO of the Urban League of Greater Kansas City in 2001. And Marc has been a passionate and fearless leader at the helm of the National Urban League and has taken us to new heights as we advance our imperative to ensure that African Americans and other disadvantaged persons are enabled and able to achieve social and economic parity in this country. So please welcome Marc Morial, President of the National Urban League.
Thank you.
So Marc and I are going to just have some dialogue. We had a great luncheon this afternoon with numerous civic and community leaders, and Marc was able to do...
With that slam and barbecue, too.
Yeah, we had some Kansas City barbecue, the best barbecue in the country, right, folks? So I'm going to jump right in. So Marc, theme one of the National Urban League's 21 pillars calls for police and community collaboration to build a restorative system. So in Kansas City, we do not have an independent community oversight board of our police department. Our police officers and leadership do not reflect the demographic of our community, and Black people are killed here, with impunity, as you heard me say. What should this kind of police and community collaboration look like, and is this the kind of collaboration possible with police accountability?
Hey, thank you very much, and let me first of all thank all of you for coming out tonight. I know there are many other places you can be, but we at the Urban League movement, the Kansas City Urban League and the National Urban League, appreciate all of you being part of this discussion that Gwen and I will have, and then the great panel that's going to follow. So, a police department where there is collaboration between the community and law enforcement is a more effective department in keeping communities safe. So why do we talk about this? Because it's a means to an end. A police department that works with and has a good relationship with the community is a more effective department. And time after time after time, this has been proven out. A police department and a law enforcement system that collaborates with communities about its priorities. So for many communities, their priorities are violent crime, preventing and responding to violent crime, and making a community more safe. Does a police department have a focus on that, or do they have a focus on misdemeanor offenses and chalking up a lot of traffic stops, arrests, just to make numbers, but it does nothing to make a community safe? So one of the things about talking about this is the hope that we can get beyond sloganeering and superficiality. There's a lot of sloganeering and superficiality which goes on in this space. Can you build it? The linchpin for effective policing is accountability. For officers to be accountable to standards, and officers to be accountable, and a system to be accountable to a community. It is difficult to do if a department feels its fealty is to a gubernatorially appointed board that has no connection with the elected leaders of the city, a gubernatorially appointed board that is not engaged, has no responsibility to be engaged in or work with the community. So a hurdle here in Kansas City, which is an unusual hurdle. Now, setting aside the state created and state appointed board does not in and of itself guarantee that you're going to have a more effective law enforcement or public safety system. Second thing I want to say is, all too often, and more people are embracing this point of view, but I want to see more elected officials and people that control the purse strings embrace this point of view, are understanding that a safe community is not just about law enforcement. It's about investments in other things: quality of housing, mental health and homeless services, youth and after-school programs, gun safety legislation. In most communities in America today, I can more easily get a handgun or a high-powered assault weapon than I can find a lollipop or a snowball or a popsicle. So you can't separate all of these things, and the prosecutor can tell you, and law enforcement will tell you, in cities where I've seen numbers, many of the offenses, gun offenses that are taking place with stolen weapons. Half, 2/3 stolen weapons from out of state, out of town. There's an iron pipeline. There's an underground economy of guns in this country, which is wicked and nasty and lucrative, and people are making money off death. And that's the truth.
So staying with the point of local control, you raised the issue of how we have a governor-appointed board of our police commissioners. You know, I recently filed a lawsuit against the Kansas City Board of Police Commissioners in an effort to legislate this issue or litigate this issue through the courts. To address, my angle is really bringing forward a lawsuit to challenge the constitutionality of a local police board, especially as it relates to the fact that the board appoints the governor appoints the board, but the city funds the police department. So I'm bringing a lawsuit under the Hancock Amendment of the Missouri Constitution that states that I, as a tax-paying citizen, can bring this suit to challenge the constitutionality of being forced to fund an institution where we actually have no representation, no say. What are your thoughts about this particular process as a lawyer? What are your thoughts about our ability to litigate this?
I just want to tell you, Gwen, I appreciate your courage in bringing this litigation. And I applaud the lawyers who are working with you for having the gumption and the creativity. You know, the civil rights movement and many of its earliest successes were won in the courts. And they were won because Charles Hamilton Houston, who was the mentor of Thurgood Marshall, and Thurgood Marshall and the lawyers back then, who began in the 1930s, bringing suits in the state court systems around segregated graduate schools primarily, understood that they had to engage in what's called creative lawyering, that they had to convince the courts to embrace different and new interpretations of the Constitution. So what you have is you are pursuing a remedy through the courts where a remedy could be achieved quickly if the legislature had good sense. You're pursuing a remedy through the courts, and there's an alternative remedy which would be very expensive, which is to go a petition route. This is an important battle that you are waging. I think it is an appropriate battle. Look, you hear many people talk about no taxation without representation. That's all this is. No taxation without representation. You're paying taxes, but your representatives have no say over the operations, the policies, the procedures of the Kansas City Police Department. Now, this is, I don't know, someone may be a better expert than me. I don't know another municipality in the country that has such a system, which is a throwback to slavery. Let's call it as it is. It is a throwback to efforts to thwart Reconstruction and thwart, if you will, the freedom of African Americans by vesting control of the police department in the state governments which were hostile to emancipation. So, you know, we got to understand when we talk about this, this is a legacy of racial exclusion. So we have to understand it that way. And anyone who challenges that, bring them on. Bring them on, because we need to not be afraid to tell the truth. Now, operationally, I said this today, if I just step back and said, who should run the Kansas City Police Department? And we said, well, who's running it now? Well, the state board's doing it. Are they doing a good job? Are they in the Super Bowl of police departments? Are they playing a winning hand? Are they playing a winning hand? So you have, in effect, on the merits, failed leadership by the people who are in control. And what you also have is resistance to change by the people who are in control. So this is a reform movement that is about taxation without representation and local control, but it's also about people saying we should have the right to determine the destiny of the agency that has the power to arrest us, take our freedom away, jails, and that has a responsibility to keep us safe. And are they doing that? So what I'm saying is we need to marshal all of the correct arguments that are necessary in this fight. But I want to caution everyone, simply achieving local control by itself will not fix the ills and the challenges of the Kansas City Police Department, but can be a step. Because what it will do is it will allow you to hold the mayor and the city council accountable for what goes on in the Kansas City Police Department. Today, they put up the money, but they say, oh, we don't have anything to do with it. We can't hire, we can't fire, we can't engage, we can't affect the discipline processes. We are just like people like a kid with his face pushed up against the glass, looking from the outside in. So that's important in understanding this unique aspect of the Kansas City situation.
So we've got about 5 or 6 minutes.
Okay.
So you got to give me shorter answers.
Yes, Gwen.
So, because I want to get a few more questions in. So I wanted you to talk briefly about changing the culture within a police department. So recently the Kansas City Star published an investigative story about racism inside the department. KCPD is a department that actually racially profiles its own officers. That plus the fact that there, discrimination in hiring, just a number of problems, but the reporting resulted from interviews with 25 current and former officers. In a system like this that has deeply rooted problems that are certainly embedded in culture, what recommendations do you have for how we can create a cultural shift? We did get rid of the horrible chief. He's gone. We have an interim chief. Right. We do have an interim chief and who was there today for lunch, but we've got to hire a new chief. What recommendations would you have for the new chief?
You need a transformative leader.
Yes.
Who has the willingness and the skills to take on entrenched interests inside. And you need a plan which involves everything from how and who you hire to how and who you train and how and who you deploy and how and who you discipline and fire. And it requires an intensive top to bottom remaking of the department. How you hire and who you hire. I support intensive psychological examinations and testing when you hire police officers because you're giving them a gun and the power to kill. And that power, the library employee, the tax collector, the firefighter, no other municipal employee has that level of power. So why should there be tough standards to ensure that people who harbor implicit biases, people who are affiliated with right-wing hate groups, people who have low self-esteem and a gun and a badge will give them a reason to take advantage of others, that you want to professionalize your police department so you have people who are about public safety. In New Orleans, we placed in the hiring standards a college preferred hiring standard. We put an investment in trying to find people that had 2-year degrees. This takes a tremendous effort that is beyond the superficial. And then it requires taking officers who are there today and truly working to see who is ready to take the trip towards change versus who's trapped. One of the things, I'll just say this, I like watching police shows because I watch them and I always put them through this lens of how real they are. And what police shows in America to do is glorify law enforcement. Truly glorify. They show a lot of things that are not constitutional. They exaggerate. I like watching them, but they're also recruiting tools. These, Top Gun was one of the top recruiting tools for the U.S. Navy. They're recruiting tools, so sometimes a person may look at NCIS or Blue Blood or one of these shows and say, I want to be in law enforcement. That's what I want to do. And the glorification and the exaggeration, something I have concerns about. So we, this remaking, it's not just a Kansas City issue. We have to remake law enforcement on a national basis. We also have to rethink how we address public safety. Last thing I'll say, I'm trying to remember the city. Bakari Sellers, you may remember the city. I don't know what city it is. They did an analysis of all their 911 calls and to determine which of the 911 calls truly required a police response. they found that 50% of them did not require a police response. It required a social worker, a mental health professional, some kind of intervention. So on the other side, we have sometimes imposed upon law enforcement challenges and issues that they're not trained for, that they're not prepared for. So we have to rethink the entire crisis response system. We have to rethink how we invest in communities. Our 21 pillars that I recommend to you is a start. We put that out there, Gwen, because we want local communities to advocate at the local level for change.
So we do have a few more minutes. We actually got 5 more minutes. I thought we were to be done at 6:30. We have 5 more minutes, so I get to ask 2 more questions in 5 minutes if you keep up with the short answers. So I want to talk more about, here in Kansas City, we've been champions for the reallocation of revenues. Currently, our city funds the police department to the tune of around $263 million a year. And Ryan will talk about this, I'm sure, on the panel, and he cited some statistics this afternoon at the luncheon. But basically, the more we invest in the police department, the less we're getting in terms of results. Basically, we see increased crime, low solve rates, but more money going in. What type of, could you elaborate a little bit more on what we like to call early intervention strategies that you employed in New Orleans when you were mayor to reform law enforcement in New Orleans? Now, you can go on and on this subject, but I'm going to give you 2 minutes.
I'm going to tell you, I'm a center invest in young people. Let me say that again. Invest in young people. Invest in intensive after-school opportunities, sports, arts, music, reading, drawing. Invest in youth. Make sure that in the summer, every young person who wants a job has a job.
But what were some specific things you did in New Orleans? I remember you talking about it. You all did some work in community centers. Did you build community
we
centers?
opened, one thing we did in the policing side, we opened police substations. So we had large public housing developments. We opened substations in public housing, and then the chief was smart. He recruited people on the force that grew up in those neighborhoods to be assigned to those neighborhoods.
To be assigned to those neighborhoods.
To those neighborhoods.
So
You say, get the guys
let me just
who grew up
inject
there.
one other thing here to talk. We have recently, our Missouri legislature passed a law that allows police officers to live outside of Kansas City and come into the city to police us. So there's something.
I got in a hell of a fight that I won, insisting and enforcing that all city employees live in the city.
Well, that's a requirement for Kansas City. All city employees must live in Kansas City, but police officers can live wherever they want.
See, I don't think it's fair.
Of course
I don't
not.
think police officers should be treated. The argument, let me tell you, I left office, they repealed the residency requirement. They argued that the residency requirement was preventing them from hiring.
They must have been talking to the same
Guess
people
what? It was a complete farce. They still can't hire. I said the key to hiring was 1, competitive salaries, good working conditions, and a recruiting effort. Treat this like any professional organization. I'm going to pay people professionally, and I'm going to set high standards. And we're going to recruit. We're going to go and we're going to recruit. We're going to go to colleges and junior colleges and military bases and community centers, and we used to go to weightlifting shows and to recruit police officers, right? And we toughen the standards. And once we had competitive pay and we had a recruiting drive, we recruited officers. They used that bogus argument. You know who championed municipal employees living in the city? Richard J. Daley the first. He was mayor of Chicago in the 50s and 60s. He said, if the city pays you, I want you to live in the city so you make groceries in the city. You spend money in the city. You're invested in the community. And I think that these things have played out all over the country. It's worth fighting for the right standards. And so what's wrong with living? Kansas City is a beautiful city. What's wrong with living in the city of Kansas City? Now, I did a couple of things, because we created special home ownership programs for city employees, including police and fire officers and fire department, fire people, fire service officers, teachers, university officials. I mean, we went out of our way to address, okay, there's a problem with housing, we're going to address it. We're going to create some programs. We had down payment assistance programs, low interest rate programs for not just police officers, all municipal employees, of course, of which police officers were one. So, look, these issues are going to require a long-standing, Gwen, your lawsuit is important. The advocacy of people, it's good to see a coalition around this moving forward. I think, keep in mind, it's so important for everyone to understand the goal. The goal here is a safe, equitable community. What's the goal? What do we want to see at the end? And for too long, the mentality is if you have crackdown policing, you can make a community safe. I say no. There's not any evidence that either proves that point, no empirical studies that prove that point. You have to have a police department, a law enforcement system that people trust and work with, and then the result of that will be a safer community.
So thank you, Marc. We're going to wrap it up here.
Thank you.
On schedule.
And I'll just say, I just want to say what I said earlier today. Some of you all were at the lunch. I want the people of Kansas City to know that Gwen Grant is going to be recognized by the National Urban League this summer in Washington, D.C. She will be recognized as a woman of power for her long and strong advocacy here in Kansas City. So, Gwen, I want your folks to know, and by the way, there's still registration tickets available if you want to come see Gwen receive her award. DC's not too far away, 2 hours and 48-minute flight, right?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marc. Oh, he wants us to stay right here. Okay. So as we make this transition, I want to take this opportunity to introduce Jerica Richardson, who is the Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Special Initiatives at the National Urban League. Jerica will be moderating our 21 Pillars panel discussion. And I just want to say a few words. Jerica is originally from Kansas City, so I was extremely delighted when I met her and have had the pleasure over the past few years to work with Jessica as they've supported our efforts here in Kansas City. So I think you will be very much engaged and very impressed with Jessica as our panel moderator. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica. Is she back here? Oh, okay, yes. Please welcome Jessica Richardson.
Well, thank you, President Grant, and good evening, everyone. Well, I will have to say it is so great to be back in Kansas City, my original hometown. We are really excited that we were able to come here and share more about the 21 Pillars. As Gwen said, I serve as Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the National Urban League. And in addition to thanking the Kansas City Urban League for hosting us, I also want to thank the Kansas City Public Library and Executive Director, John Heron. So thank you so much for having us this evening. Since 1910, the League has been working to lift barriers to opportunity for Black people and other people of color in this country, and unjust policing is a huge barrier to our progress. Although often overlooked in the national news cycle, Kansas City experiences one of the highest rates of police violence in this country, and so that's why the National Urban League really chose to come here. It's why we've been focusing on the Midwest and why we launched our Heartland tour. And it's also why the Urban League, both locally and nationally, have called upon the Justice Department to conduct a patterns and practices investigation into the KCPD. Now really is the perfect time to engage in difficult conversations about redefining public safety in Kansas City and what it really should look like. In April of 2021, we launched our 21 pillars for redefining public safety and restoring community trust. And our pillars provide a framework for advocacy that paves the way beyond the status quo. Our forward-thinking plan is emphasized by five key themes designed to promote the protection and preservation of life, dignity, and trust, while also building safer communities. Those 5 themes are: collaborate with communities to re-envision public safety; accountability, which we know is critically important; change divisive policing policies; require transparency, reporting, and data collection; and improve hiring standards and training. So tonight's panel will focus on holding police accountable while uprooting and reforming the culture. We are at a critical moment in history, and we hope this conversation opens the proverbial door to redesigning this system. Now, let's meet our panelists. First up, we have Bakari Sellers. Come on up, Bakari. Bakari is a 2-time New York Times best-selling author, civil rights activist, attorney, entrepreneur, legislator, and overall prolific voice of the culture. Bakari Sellers has helped write the blueprint for today's civil rights movement. Bakari forged his own path from a very early age, let me say that. He entered Morehouse College at the age of 16. And look, I can attest to this because I was a 19-year-old sophomore when Bakari stepped on campus. I was across the way at Spelman College, and he was dynamic then just as he is dynamic today. He went on to become a graduate of the University of South Carolina Law School, and he became the youngest legislator in South Carolina State Legislature at the age of 22. He has penned 2 books, his memoir, My Vanishing Country, and a children's book entitled, Who Are Your People? Bakari is a CNN analyst and hosts the Bakari Sellers podcast. He is also an attorney with the Strom Law Firm, LLC in Columbia, South Carolina. Thanks for joining us, Bakari.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a familiar face to Kansas City, Jean Peters Baker. Jean Peters Baker, welcome to the stage.
No, they told me here.
Right next to the other side.
No, you're on the other side. See, you messed up, see?
Oh, funny.
Welcome to Kansas.
So Jean Peters Baker was appointed Jackson County prosecutor in May 2011 and elected to the position in November 2012. She is only the second woman elected to the Jackson County prosecutor's office, and the first, U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill, hired Baker as a young assistant prosecutor. Over her career in the prosecutor's office, Baker has served in sex crimes and child abuse, community justice, domestic violence, drug enforcement, family support, major crimes, and as chief warrant officer. For her efforts in fighting the drug trade in Kansas City, she was honored with the Excellence Award for advancing combat objectives given by the county prosecutor, police agencies, and community advocates. Baker earned a bachelor's degree from Columbia, Missouri, a master's degree in public administration from the University of Missouri at Columbia, and a law degree from the University of Missouri at Kansas City School of Law. Thank you so much, Dean, for joining us. Next up, we have Ryan Sorrell. Ryan has a diverse background, including working at one of the nation's most esteemed Black think tanks, one of Chicago's top B2B tech PR agencies, a top 3 global PR firm, and founding the largest Black digital media platform in Kansas City. During his professional career, he has worked on brands such as Facebook, Samsung, and Google. Sorrell is a co-founder of the Kansas City-based abolitionist organization Black Rainbow and has engaged in a number of public talks as an abolitionist thinker, including on NPR, PBS, a Casey Art Institute lecture, as well as the T-Mobile Speaker Series. Most recently, Sorrell founded the fastest-growing digital Black media publication, the Kansas City Defender. Let's welcome Ryan. And last but not least, we are joined by Shanette Hall. Shanette Hall began her career at the St. Louis County Police Department in 2010 as a public safety dispatcher. Several years later, she followed in her father's footsteps and became a police officer with the same department. As a recruitment officer for the department, her tasks included speaking to individuals about employment opportunities in law enforcement and helping them begin their career with the St. Louis County PD. She also helped to expand the Ethical Society of Police into the St. Louis County Police Department. This organization champions fairness and ethical treatment towards minority police officers and fights against ill treatment towards citizens by police. Currently, Shanette is the Chief and Director of Public Safety at Harris Stowe State University in St. Louis. Welcome, Shanette. Well, we should get started. I think one of the things it's critically important to talk about is accountability. Obviously, as I said earlier, it's one of the key themes of our 21 pillars for redefining public safety and restoring community trust. And when we're talking about accountability, it includes holding police accountable in civil and criminal court, preventing union contracts from blocking accountability, investigating police misconduct, and creating independent, all-civilian community boards. So this question actually is for everyone on the panel. In your past and your present roles, what do you see as the biggest barrier to true police accountability? And Bakari, since you're next to me, I'm going to start with you, and we're going to go down the row.
I was actually going to start with somebody who probably knows more about this than I. Actually, both of the ladies probably know more about this than I. So let me start by simply saying that I'm from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, where we have 3 host stoplights and a blinking light. And my mom and dad always tell me that the 2 most important words in the English language are the words thank you, and they're not nearly said enough. And so thank you to my good friend Jerica, who I've known for a long time, 21 years, 20 years. And to
Something
Marc,
like that.
I think we should give Marc Morial a round of applause. I love to see Marc and Mitch Landrieu in the same room together trying to figure out who was the best mayor in the city of New Orleans. You guys have never seen discussions as such. So I think that to answer Jerica's question, I think we have to define the word. And I hate sometimes we get down the path of asking what is something and we don't define it. So people have a hard time understanding what accountability is. And let me tell you, accountability is not justice. Those 2 words are not the same, they're not synonymous, and they don't belong together in the dictionary. And so when people talk about accountability or justice, the way I frame it is, look, I look through the lens of George Floyd. People are like, oh my God, we got justice in George Floyd. We did not, we got accountability. Justice would be George Floyd still being here. Does everybody understand the difference between the 2? Good. So let's talk about the bar that is accountability, and let's use George Floyd as the example. all it took for black people in this country to get accountability was Danella Frazier, who was 17 years old, having the audacity to be able to pull out a camera and videotape, because as we know, the Minneapolis Police Department said that black man died from a medical event in the press release they sent out that night. We had to have 9 minutes of video. We had to have a global pandemic. And people are like, Bakari, what does a pandemic have to do with George Floyd? Well, you guys had to sit at home and watch it repeatedly. You couldn't be caught up in your daily task. You couldn't go to the store. You couldn't be outside. And so you were literally confined to your homes, having to watch this image over and over and over again. And then it was just the hypersensitivity of the message that George was. A knee on the neck, him echoing and bellowing for his mother. And then on top of that, last but not least, you only had to have worldwide outrage. So think about the bar that's set for accountability. Not even justice. A 17-year-old girl with courage, a video, a global pandemic, and then global outrage equals accountability. And I say that and frame it as such so that people understand how high the bar is. Very tangibly, there are things we can do. We'll talk about those things. But I do want to understand, I want to start by just making sure, before I pass it to my left, that people understand that accountability and justice are not the same thing. In fact, justice, if you don't remember anything else I say, remember that justice is a verb. A lot of you all treat it as a noun, and that bothers me. But justice is an action item. It requires work to achieve. And so I'm very, very concerned that if justice is fleeting, accountability's bar is really, really high.
Thank you for that, Bakari. Jane?
Deep, it's heavy.
I'm not deep, I just was flowing with it. I felt good in what I was saying.
It was good. It was good. No, I'm making fun, but justice is not often found in courtrooms. And that I've been in a lot of them. And in courtrooms, really there's two sides that lose. Now, courtrooms are important. And when you live in a city like I do, Kansas City, just a few blocks from here in a really beautiful neighborhood, but we have really, really high violence. And people who experience that high violence do not experience the opportunity for a courtroom because it just doesn't happen often enough. So, and to be really specific about that, we have a very bad violence problem here. We have had it for a long time. It's not new to us. But the shootings that we have in the city, we have over 600. We'll probably rank up over 600 non-fatal shootings this year. That's where a bullet actually strikes the skin. But it's a non-fatal. That's a really serious event. And we'll have probably over 600 of those this year. But we'll only probably about 15% of those will be sent to my office for prosecution. So that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people that's out there in our community trying to figure it out all on their own. So I don't know what justice looks like necessarily even as the prosecutor, but I know what despair looks like. And despair is a community that leaves all of those people grappling on their own. So we have a non-fatal shooting problem. It means we also have a homicide problem, and we'll probably have upwards of 150 homicides this year as well. Now, people will argue with me in the police department often about what our clearance rate is and accuse me that you can get numbers to say whatever you want them to say. No, you can't. No, you can't. No, you cannot. You could lie. You can misrepresent. But only about 1 in 2 homicides are solved in this city. We know that because if you go out over a span of about 5 years, that's what the numbers show us. So we need to stop being dishonest about what our current situation is. If we could just be honest about we have a terrible violence problem, but we also have a pretty poor response. And I'm not just blaming the police for that. I'm gonna blame myself for that, And I also blame all of us who have allowed a non-fatal shooting victim to go about his or her life without any assistance from any of us, because that's what he's had to do. That's not what a healthy community looks like. So anyway, I'll say we need to improve our clearance rates, though. We must do that, because that's one of those factors of, do you trust your government systems to solve your problem? And if you don't trust your government system to solve your problem, you will not rely on them. You will not rely on them. You won't call them first. You'll call your uncle first. You'll call dad first. So this is just a reality, and I'm maybe bleaker than than this guy here, about justice. But the truth is, we can improve this. We can improve this, and we can tell our community that we care enough about them that we're willing to lean into this problem, acknowledge that we have one, acknowledge what our actual clearance rates are, and quit playing around with that. Stop playing around with that. You can't lie about numbers. We have so many dead people, we solve so many cases, so let's stop being dishonest about it. Let's just own it. About 1 in 2 of those homicides are solved, a little bit better than that. Over the 5-year span of time, it was 55%. That's pretty bad, folks. And it's pretty hard to tell a community that that's good enough, because it ain't good enough. So anyway, what I'm saying is, the reason, one of the big factors, in that clearance rate is this trust gap, a big trust gap. We have to find a way to fill that. That's obvious. How you do it is probably harder. So I'll pass.
Well, Ryan, I'll say Jean just shared some very disturbing numbers, and I know from your vantage point as an activist, you know the numbers very well. What are some of the barriers that you are seeing from your work on the ground?
Well, I first want to start and I think that we can't have a conversation about accountability without uplifting the names of the Black people who have been murdered by the Kansas City Police Department. So I want to say justice for Terrence Bridges, justice for Ryan Stokes and the Stokes family, who just recently was told that they are not allowed to sue the Kansas City Police Department despite the fact that the Kansas City Police Department murdered their son. Justice for, as I mentioned, Terrence Bridges. There's a lot of Black people who have, throughout the years, been murdered by the Kansas City Police Department, and there has been absolutely no justice on behalf of Black people in our community. And so I think when we talk about accountability, we have to point out and we have to be very explicit and name these horrific things that are happening in our community. For example, we know that Officer Blaine Newton pushed to the ground and drove his knee into the back of a 9-month pregnant Black woman and almost caused her to lose her baby. He's also the same exact person who murdered Cameron Lamb. And so, he's still on the police force today. And so we can't have a conversation about accountability when you still have a police officer who has horrifically brutalized a 9-month pregnant Black woman and who has also murdered a Black man in our community and remains on the police force, who the chief of police and even the interim chief of police will not speak out against these individuals and say that they should not be on the police force. I think that when we talk about accountability, we have to ground the conversation with these explicit facts. And so I think we also have to expand our imagination around what accountability looks like, because as I mentioned at the luncheon earlier, between the years of 2012 and 2018, the Kansas City Police Department had a 24% increase in its budget, and it had a 47% increase in violent crime in Kansas City. And so there was absolutely no correlation between increasing the police budget and a decrease in violent crime. And so to me, when we talk about accountability, the fact that police are actually murdering our community members and our family members, that's only the tip of the iceberg, because the fact that police are also getting this exuberant amount of money, that's also taking away from the money that should be going to our schools. For instance, right now, the Kansas City Police Department receives more money than every single Kansas City public school combined put together, which is just completely asinine to me. It's outrageous. It makes absolutely no sense. We also are currently amidst a housing crisis. We have numerous houseless individuals in our community who don't get the services that they need because of the fact, not in spite of the fact, but because of the fact that we give so much money to our police department. So to me, accountability not only looks like explicitly naming these people in the police department and the problems with the police department that we have, as far as these officers continuously murdering black people, the culture of white supremacy that goes unquestioned in the department. I do not think that, personally, and I'll tell you on the ground as well with organizers, we do not think that a new police chief is even capable, regardless of who the police chief is. A new police chief is not capable of completely transforming a police department that for over a century now, has been founded and has existed in white supremacy. And so the last thing I'll say is that regardless, we can give 1 or 2 years even of diversity training, which even that doesn't exist in the police department currently, to my knowledge. Even if we gave 1 to 2 years of diversity, equity, and inclusion training to these police officers, you can't undo a lifetime of being socialized into white supremacy. And so I think we have to expand our imagination when we talk about public safety. I think Marc brought up an excellent point earlier when he said that public safety should look like investing in arts, investing in education, investing in housing, investing in what we call life-affirming institutions and services. I think if we invest in those types of solutions, then we won't need to give $263 million to the police. And I think that, to me, that's where accountability can start, is by talking about budgets and talking about who we're giving money to and talking about whose lives we're investing in, rather than investing in a police force that has continuously murdered people. So.
Very powerful, right?
Well, dang, right?
Right.
I mean, you're just gonna throw all that out there. Good job. Good job. I agree. So before I start, and I'm glad I actually got to follow up with you or follow up behind you in that one, I've been called a very optimistic pessimist, and so I'll throw that out there right now before I give you this answer. And so we talk about accountability and what obstacles are in accountability. I'll be totally blunt and honest with you this whole time, and even if we have conversations after this, we all lack it. And I'm gonna say we all lack it, and I'll explain it to you, because you're gonna say, well, why are we the problem? Why are we not here? Not just us in this room. Accountability lacks at every step of the way. And I don't want to say this to sound so negative and to make people feel hopeless and think that there's no way out of this whatsoever, but it truly lacks every step of the way. The accountability lacks when people go into the door and they decide they want to be a police officer and they're trying to get an application, and the police department are denying black and brown people or anybody that comes from a diverse background, saying you don't deserve to be here. Nobody is holding them accountable when they're trying to get in the door. When people finally do get in the door and they go to a police academy, the accountability is lacked there as well too, because people are still being trained in police academies. I'll give you a quick term of what they're being trained on. It's called ATM. It's called Ask, Tell, Make. Police officers are still being trained this to this day, and they're not being held accountable for this. Some of your largest police departments are being trained this. If you are, I'm a little bit of a TV junkie. I watch We Own This City right now, which is shown on HBO and produced by the same people who produced The Wire, which tidbit is one of the greatest shows on the land. But that's another story. We have people still teaching you this in the police academy. So even as we think we're trying to redefine what this public safety is as we're talking, just know that there's somebody coming behind you that's going to retire from this job 20 years from now, 30 years from now. They're still being taught some of the same oppressive conducts that you all are fighting right now today. It's 20 years in the making. It's 20, 30 years out. When we're talking about new police chiefs, I have no idea what the new interim police chief is like in Kansas City right now. What I will tell you, though, what is done time and time again, and we saw it even with the Capitol Police, we are accepting those in power to put a black face in front of these issues with no solutions whatsoever, and telling them, go fix the problem, after somebody before them, after some white man and some white woman has messed it up. But this is institutional. He probably doesn't even have the means to do what it is that he needs to do. And so you mentioned him not even, and not taking up for us because I don't know, you mentioned him not even speaking up about one of his officers who has shown to have been a problem from police misconduct and murdering people, right? Now this leads us on to police unions. Police unions are some of the hardest people to fight. But guess why some of they're the hardest people to fight? I'll throw you a curveball. Police unions have donated to more Democrats than what you all know. So the same people who sit up and they have a face and they scream out either Black Lives Matter or hold police accountable or justice for this person is turning around and accepting money from those who are running the Fraternal Order of Police in their respective cities. And so they're not doing as much as they can. To hold police accountable. Let's take it up another layer, because we're just going to throw everybody out there, right? Let's talk about even some of our civic leaders that we have in our cities. Our civic leaders that are worried more so about their image, that are worried more so about protecting their self than they are about protecting Black people. And so we get people up there and they want to be able to see themselves in the mirror, and while you're supposed to be running whatever organization it is you're running at the time, and you're supposed to be, I don't know, let's say, fighting for the advancement of colored people in your local city, you're actually fighting for the disadvancement of the colored people in your city. These people need to be removed. Accountability starts there as well. It goes past that. I'm from a town called St. Louis. Not even a town, we're gonna call it a city. Why am I talking about myself? That actually has really good barbecue. We were talking about that earlier, but I don't want y'all to jump me. So, from St. Louis, we have an organization that's changed their names a couple times because they're trying to dodge that accountability too, called Civic Progress, right? There's a group of millionaires and billionaires in every single city that is sitting behind, probably with their feet up on the desk, saying, how am I gonna control my city today? And a lot of times those people do not look like us. They don't. They're controlling your mayors, they're controlling your county executives, and every time a mayor or a county executive run in their campaign and they say, I'm uncontrollable, I'm not bought, 7 times out of 10, and I made that up, but I feel comfortable making that number up, 7 times out of 10, they're bought. They're bought, I promise you that. They're taking the same money from the police unions who are also donating to Donald Trump. They're taking the same money from those who are sitting here trying to design what your city looks like. They're taking the same money from the developers who are responsible for the redlining in your cities. All of these things that feed into crime, right? So the accountability is missed on every single level. But until we understand what those levels are, and until we understand that there's not one answer, there's not one solution. It's not just within the prosecutors. It's not just within the mayor. It's not just within your state legislators, state senators. It's not even just within Biden, President Biden. It's so many people that have to do this. And until we understand, until we call foul play, until we're ready to call foul play even on our friends that are doing wrong, I don't think nobody's really ready.
Well, Shanette, thank you for all of that. I definitely agree that accountability is on all of us. But I want to come back to you because you are a member of law enforcement.
Yes.
And you work with an organization that is aimed at holding police accountable. We've had all these folks out here that have been calling for more independent oversight of the police department through civilian boards, wanting to investigate independently use of force. So I really want to ask, can police themselves?
No. That was quick. Is that the question?
But I want you to elaborate.
Oh, okay. So,
As a member of law enforcement, why? Why not?
So there are some, I'll break that down. I was being a little bit humorous, but not really. Once again, that's that optimistic pessimist coming out a little bit. Yes and no, but overall, not really. This is a camaraderie within law enforcement. A lot of people, and it's very understandable why it is. The things that a law enforcement officer has to go through on a daily basis is something that the average person does not experience. I can tell you that firsthand. And so because of that, there is this emotional bondage that happens between the people that you're going to work with. And they begin to have this psychological effect of not even being able to see how they can hold their partner accountable. Throw a tidbit in there, a good reason as to why we need reoccurring psychological exams for police officers, but put that in your back pocket. So when we're saying these things, and police officers are growing up with each other throughout the police department, and you have some people who are in internal affairs, and then now they're tasked with going back and investigating their friend, that implicit bias then becomes very explicit. And they'll say, Johnny really didn't mean it. Johnny didn't mean to kill that person. Johnny didn't mean to beat so-and-so on the side of the road. I think he had his reason behind it was quite different. We cannot. But when we think about these independent review boards, when we think about citizen review boards, those are great, those are good, but a lot of times what we are seeing is they are coming, they're not equipped. They're not understanding police departments and how this machine is functioning. Therefore, we come in, or they come in, with this heartfelt effort. I really want to change. I want to see the police department better, but they don't know how. This is a machine that's been here forever. When we're talking about going back to slave patrols, right? Because that's what policing was. This machine has been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and you have one person who has a very good heart and say, you know what, I'm gonna change it. That's great, that's half the battle. The other half is truly understanding how it is that we change it now. And so we'll have people that come in and look at it as a prestigious way. Even right now in St. Louis, we have lawyers, big time lawyers that are on the board, HR execs, judges, and they're like, oh, I'm on the police board of police commissioners. I'm here. I was appointed by the mayor. I was appointed by the county executive. Once again, when I tell you the majority of people are bots, the majority of people are bots. And so we're expecting these people to hold them accountable when they don't, they don't know what accountability looks like in the police department. They don't understand the union contracts. They don't understand the process, the disciplinary process. And so how can we expect them, without teaching them, to do better for the sake of the police department, which is ultimately doing better for the sake of citizens?
Thank you for that. Well, you mentioned folks are bought. I think political courage is in short supply in this country. But Gene, I do want to turn to you because earlier this year,
I don't
officer.
necessarily like that preface.
I really like it.
Oh,
so
yeah,
much.
no.
Okay.
See where it goes.
Yeah, I was like, hold on. Go to somebody else
Question
first.
goes after that
See
person.
how he tries to derail me? Earlier this year, Officer DeValcanier was found guilty of shooting and killing Cameron Lamb. Yeah, that's important. We need to highlight that. Because how often do we see those convictions? Do you think this conviction marks a change in the course for Kansas City? Now you brought it, so.
Tough question.
Wow. I want to say yes, but I would like to say yes. I don't believe, though, that honestly I can. We overcame some major obstacles on that case, and I can't just blame the last police chief. It was the police department, that really put their finger on the scales of justice on that case and fought back every step of the way. So I guess time's going to have to tell that. I guess time will tell. But I don't feel too hopeful about that, to be honest. Sorry. I wish I could give you something better than that, but I decided to go with honesty tonight.
Well, honesty is important, as is transparency. We can't solve the problems at hand if we're not honest about the depth of them and their nature. So,
and let me just add that why I don't feel too positive about the change in the department, because most police officers have told me they think I'm wrong, and I wish that's just the way they said it, but it was real ugly, and it's still ugly. And I mean, I knew when I saw that case as it began to develop, even with the fingers on the scale, I knew, you could kind of see these if you've been doing it for a while. To me, the case was a pretty obvious violation of the Fourth Amendment and pretty basic. And I've had officers argue with me about the Fourth Amendment, and I've told them, it's one of the oldest and most stable laws we've got. In fact, that one came from England, so we've been working on this one for a while. So we kind of know this one. But that's kind of where we're at, and I think there's just unwillingness to ever see that a police officer could do something that violates the law. And so, you just take on you vilify the person that's, bringing the cause. So I got pretty vilified on that. And, but I'm still standing, so, it's all right. Yeah. But the point is, people that are in this they'll bruise you up. You'll get bloody for it. So that's, I guess, where we are.
Absolutely, but I want to thank you for moving forward and seeing a wrong and doing what you could within your role to make it right. We need more people doing that in this country. And Ryan is right. Earlier, he named so many of the victims of police violence here in Kansas City. And I don't want to gloss over that. I think it's really important that we talk about the impact that it has on families, the impact it has, quite frankly, in all of us. Bakari talked about the video, seeing it over and over and over again. So Bakari, I know you've worked with families that have experienced this firsthand. Talk to me a little bit about that work and the impact that you've seen.
I mean, this week has been somewhat interesting because I'm here tonight, and tonight's what, Wednesday?
Thursday.
Thursday. This week I actually had a murder trial in Orangeburg County, South Carolina. And yesterday my client got found not guilty, which is rare, as you can possibly imagine, when 12 jurors come back and you go through this extensive trial and get found not guilty. And then on Tuesday we announced this settlement in the case of Andrew Brown. And Andrew Brown was a unique case that happened last year. It captivated the world, weirdly enough, because it happened kind of in a post-COVID type era. But Andrew was the individual in Pasquotank County, which was Elizabeth City. And when the police showed up, he drove away and he was shot in the back of the head. It was in eastern North Carolina. And so we announced the settlement in that case. And it's kind of surreal because all of these things are converging at the same moment. But one of the things I wanted to talk about as we talk about this moment and the Black experience is that one of the things that individuals like Marc Morial and this organization highlight is that there is a direct correlation from Mamie Till in 1955 to these parents up here. There's a direct correlation between Jimmy Lee and Medgar Evers and Terrence Crutcher and Botham Jean and George and Walter and Keith. And one of the first things that when I speak to families, and like I say, I wish it was work that we never literally had to do, is that as a Black parent, you never hope that your child becomes a hashtag. However, you also walk with the burden and fear that that's a real possibility. And it's just a very unique experience. It's what I call the proverbial or perpetual state of grieving that we have to do. And I think that one of the most amazing things about this panel is that what we are trying to do is break that cycle of grieving. And that's the most difficult thing. So how do you do it tangibly? I've always stated that there are things we can do constructively and are measures we can take to help break these cycles. But in order for me to help you understand how we break the cycles, I also have to get you to believe that the criminal justice system in this country is not broken. Like a lot of us come from this perspective that the criminal justice system is broken. And what if I told you that the criminal justice system works the way it's intended to work?
Absolutely.
Okay? So instead of trying to fix something that's not broken, you have to deconstruct it and reimagine it, right? And I know that sounds kind of like foo-foo, but let me be that, okay? And so one of the things that I always tell people as we try to find these constructive, practically progressive, whatever, progressive in not the political sense, but moving forward is that, and one tangible thing, Jerica, is that with all due respect to my prosecutor on my left here, I firmly do not believe that prosecutors should, because you only have 1 in a million, should prosecute officer misconduct. I don't think that should be her job. And you say, why? It's because she uses these same officers day after day to make her case. Not her, but the relationship.
Yeah.
The relationship is incestuous. In every district you go into, the prosecutor has to use these same officers to make cases day after day. But one of the things we can do to break that cycle, to reimagine what it looks like, is have independent offices come in and investigate these cases of officer misconduct, so that these prosecutors are not placed in a position whereby they break this incestuous relationship and it becomes that much more difficult. It's just that type of idea, Jerica, I think that we have to have more of. It's just reimagining, because for every conviction you get, and the crazy part about the work that I do now is I tell families all the time, I say, look, I'm gonna try to get you justice criminally and civilly. And I don't know about Kansas, but we got $3 million in Andrew Brown. Andrew Brown was one of the worst cases I've ever seen. It just is. It was a $20 million case any day of the week. But it's a poor county. The county had $2 million of insurance. The county put in another $1 million out of their budget. That's all they had. That's all they had. And so when you think about trying to get justice for these families, and then you look at them and say, I'm gonna try to get you good justice criminally too. People look at Derek Chauvin and all of these other cases, and now they're like, oh my God, we can go get that too. And unfortunately, that just ain't really the case. And so the work that we do, I wish is work that we didn't have to do. However, I do appreciate from the grassroots level, from actually having people in law enforcement do the work, from having prosecutors who try to do the work day in and day out, I think that we can, and this may be my youthful naivete, and I may have to stop saying that because I'm 37
claiming
now.
youth over here. Sorry, I'm a little older than you. I have a little bit more
37.
season.
I know,
I
I'm only
forgot,
37. Yeah,
right?
thank you.
Okay.
So anyway, I always say that there's nothing irredeemable about this country. We just have to reimagine what she looks like. And I'm a firm believer we have to deconstruct this system and reimagine what this system looks like from the ground up.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue, and thank you for that, into hearing more from Ryan. You know, Bakari pointed out the system is working exactly how it's designed. And I can say, just hearing from all of you in the room and your responses and hearing the panel, I don't think anyone is very happy with the current system at hand. So Ryan, I would love to hear more from you about the abolitionist perspective and approach to redefining public safety here in Kansas City.
Definitely. I think to quickly go back to the case of Cameron Lamb, just because I wanted to comment on that, because I think we can't forget the fact that the police actually framed Cameron Lamb, and the police said that he had a weapon on him when he did not have a weapon on him. And speaking of the police investigating themselves, speaking of, in that situation, it was the Missouri State Highway Patrol who initially commented on that investigation. They said that, I'm thinking of a different situation, which I'll get to in a second, but they said that Cameron Lamb had a weapon on him, he did not. And the police chief, Rick Smith, said that every single one of the officers on his police force would have handled that situation the very same way, which is incredibly telling to me, and I think that he was not lying when he said that. I think also if we talk about the case of Malcolm Johnson, who was also murdered by the Kansas City Police Department. He originally, the first reports that came out said that it was a shootout, that he was armed and engaged in a shootout with the police. It was not released. It wasn't announced until later when some pastors leaked video footage that was leaked to them from employees in the gas station where Malcolm Johnson was murdered. The initial reports that the police and that the Missouri State Highway Patrol told the public, and that includes white media outlets, because I'm a media outlet person myself. I pay attention to how white media outlets report police murders of black people, and every single media outlet, to my knowledge, parroted the initial police reports that said that Malcolm Johnson was engaged in an armed shootout with the Kansas City Police Department. It did not come out until later when we saw the actual video surveillance footage ourselves that not only was Malcolm not armed at all, but that Malcolm was being held down by 2 to 3 police officers, and that one of the police officers accidentally shot the other police officer and then killed Malcolm by shooting him 2 times. And so when we talk about can the police investigate themselves, like I mentioned earlier, the Missouri State Highway Patrol was tasked with investigating that situation, and they helped to cover it up. It was a cover-up, plainly, to say that plainly. And so I think that those are just some of the situations that I think about when we talk about can the police investigate themselves. There's been numerous times, whether, like I said, with Cameron Lamb, whether it's Malcolm Johnson, where the police have flat out lied. And I think that we have to just be plain about that fact too, that the police, the default response to my understanding of the police department, at least the Kansas City Police Department, is that they will lie very quickly before they will tell the truth. That's just my understanding from seeing these cases. I mean, you can't look at the case of Malcolm Johnson and there could have been no, misunderstanding in that situation to say that he was armed. And so those are just a few of the things that I think about when we talk about can we trust the police department, can it be reformed? But going back to the question of kind of the history of the police department and how we got to where we are, I think oftentimes when we talk about the police and we talk about police reform, one of the immediate reactions that we go to is we say, well, we need to improve police-community relations. And I think that oftentimes we can think that that's a new concept, but it's not a new concept. People have been saying that since one of the very first times that people began saying that was one of the largest police reform bills in American history, which was the 1968 Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Street Act. That was one of the largest bills that gave $10 billion to police departments across the country. And they did so in the name of increasing police-community relations. The second time, or the second largest bill that took place in American history to do so-called police reform was, of course, as most people know, the 1994 Clinton crime bill. A part of that bill that they did was creating an Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services. So once again, it's in the name of increasing police-community relations. That's what people say we should be trying to do, but we can just see from those 2 bills alone, did we see any decrease in crime? In fact, what we saw was a 500% increase in the amount of people who were incarcerated. And so not only does this alleged goal of increasing police-community relations simply, to me, and according to the statistics, it just does not work in my opinion. So I think that that's just one of the things that I look at when we talk about what are some of the solutions that we can look for. And once again, I think as far as an abolitionist perspective, I think a lot of people think that, it's some pie in the sky, goal that is unachievable, that I'm just some young person who maybe has not. I became an abolitionist when one of my best friends was murdered.
Take your time.
I became an abolitionist when one of my best friends was murdered in a drive-by. And weeks later, I was told that they had found the person that had killed him. And to me, it turned out that the person who killed him was 19 years old. And now he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And to me, that's not justice, because now he's spent, I don't know why he killed one of my best friends, but it is not justice that he's gonna spend the rest of his life in prison, even if he did kill one of my best friends. And so on top of that, now you have, if you imagine the money, again, if we go back to the money that's gonna be spent incarcerating the person who killed one of my best friends, is gonna be over $1 million throughout his lifetime. That could, once again, be spent on things like education, on things like housing, on things like arts, on the youth. I think that we should just really, once again, reimagine what public safety looks like. I think that right now, the police have a monopoly on our understanding of public safety. I think we have to expand what we understand public safety to be, because housing is public safety, education is public safety. There are so many different social services, mental health, healthcare is public safety, and I think that we have to expand our imagination of what public safety is. And so those are some of the areas that I would start when we talk about how can we reimagine what policing looks like.
Thank you for that, Ryan, and thank you for sharing your experience. I think we're all moved by you, and there are a lot of things that obviously needs to change. And I will say this, the reality is that Kansas City is getting a new police chief. Part of the reason that we are having conversations like these, part of the reason President Grant has been convening community conversations and bringing folks from Kansas City, but also folks elsewhere, is because you have a unique opportunity to demand and be very clear about the type of police leadership that you want here in this city. And so I would like to hear from each of you what that leadership should look like, what your expectations are for it, and really what should that police chief, when they step into office, what should be the first thing they do to really work to rebuild trust in this community? Jean, I'm going to go to you.
All right. I'm ready to answer that. I think I want a police chief that is willing to hold police officers accountable, and that means fire police officers. So it is not, in the employment standard, it is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Correct.
It is not. It is a much lower standard, and we are all of us are employed probably by somebody, and we're all held to that standard. Well, I'm an elected official. I can kind of do what I want, I guess. But the rest of you are actually held to standards, and it is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt to lose your job. So I want to see accountability in my police department at that level. And I want to see it, with some level of quickness. It doesn't have to be the next day, but there needs to be some level of a response that is not so labored and drawn out that the community sort of gave up on the answer. I also want to see a police chief that will, for instance, take a look at the data that I gave the police department that came out of my own office on disparities on race in what was being brought to me, and also what I had been prosecuting. And so to stop these practices that we know when 81 to 84% of black men show up in my office, with a case ready to be filed on them for a drug sale, then okay, hey, that stat's all out of whack, and we know that. There's no way to justify that stat. There's no way to justify it. Let's call it what it is. So now we see it. We see it. It's time for us not just react at the prosecutor's office about what we'll file and what we won't, but we need to have policing strategies that address those same kind of equity and unfair policing, unfair prosecution. And I want my next police chief to really embrace that, take it on, and teach me some things I don't know.
Thank you, Jean. Shanette and Bakari, I know you don't reside in Kansas City, but you all have been living in other places and encountering this problem head on over and over again. I would love to hear, your perspective from outside Kansas City, and then I'm going to close and go to Ryan on this question.
Absolutely. So it's very important to really sit back and determine what characteristics you would like to see in your new police chief. And accountability, of course, that should almost go without saying. You would think anyway, because we're in the police department,
but
right?
But not here.
Yeah. So I can imagine that you all have some issues in Kansas City. We have issues in St. Louis. Baltimore has issues. New Orleans has issues, right? New York, Buffalo. We can go on and on and on and on. What we see, or what it is that I began to see, is that we are truly putting C-string people in leadership positions, and we're expecting them to be great when they can't even catch a ball. You can't do that. Like, you have to be realistic in the struggle. So when we're talking about what it is that we need, accountability, of course, you need people that have true will, and no one has, or very few people have that. You need people to have the will to actually make a way, because you'll hear them come, and what are some of the first things, and I hope your interim chief has not said this, but what are some of the first things that they say? Hey, these problems were not built overnight, so it's gonna take me time. One of my most favorite people in the world, absolute, James Baldwin, said at one point, how much time do you want? I need you to put a limit on it. You need 5 months, you need 6 months, you need 10 months, you need 5 years. Tell me what you need so I can hold you to that then at that point. Because we have given time. We've given our mother's time, our brother's time, our father's time. We've given the people the time, who our ancestors who have been down south, we've given you time. And time has shown us what has still happened when those last minutes of George Floyd. Time showed us how much time you let Mike Brown lay in the street. Time showed us what exactly they were going to do to Eric Gardner, how long it took him to stop breathing. That's what time keeps showing us. So how much time you want? There's no more of this, hey, let me work at it, let me get these plans in place, because we know you're disposable as well. So you have to really hold these people accountable. So they need the will, they need the tenacity, they need the determination, they need the grit to actually speak out against certain people. I promise you that a lot of these chiefs are not going to get fired. And if you do, 9 times out of 10, you could probably retire, first of all. But if you do, so what? You go out swinging. You go out doing what was right. And so if you have to lose your job because you spoke up about the officers who are murdering people, who have a long history of that police misconduct, because I guarantee you there's a Derek Chauvin in every single one of these police departments across America. If you have to go out and lose your job because you spoke up about Derek Chauvin before the rest of the world knew about Derek Chauvin, then lose your job doing that. You need to be selfless, and it's just no more explanations behind that. So these are the characteristics that we are talking about. If and when you all ever get the opportunity, I don't know if that's something you do to interview new police chiefs, but you need to start asking some of these hard questions, and do not accept no for an answer. And when they tell you, I need time, your first question is going to be what? Thank you.
Thank you, Shanette. Bakari, I'm going to go to you, and then Ryan, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience.
I'll be brief, because I think that there's been a lot of emphasis on police and the police chief, but that ain't gonna fix the problem. You know, I think you need community solutions. I think you need holistic solutions. I think Ryan talked about it, Marc talks about it, we all talk about it. But holistic solutions and the way that you want community to look, it's all required. It's kind of contrary a little bit to Ryan's belief, although we're going to get there together. Like my mama, she don't want fewer police, she wants better police, right? Yeah. And the theory is, like, how do you get there? Like, how do you stop having to have a gut feeling that your father or brother or your child won't make it home to you safely? Well, we all have police in our family. How many of you all have police in your family? Y'all ain't got no police in y'all family over here in Kansas? Yeah, but you take it down south, everybody got a member of law enforcement in their family. But what they'll all tell you, even if you just got a friend or you know somebody, is that 50-60% of the calls they get called on, they don't need to be there. They're out of their depth. They don't know how to handle the situation. I represent 5, 6, 7 families right now of people who were going through a mental health crisis that were gunned down. Jarvis Randall is probably the best case I can tell you. I'm doing depositions in this case next week. All of these cases don't make the national eye. They just don't. Jarvis was a unique case because Jarvis felt like he wasn't right. And so he called his mama. And his mama said, Jarvis, you don't sound good. Go to the emergency room. So Jarvis went to the emergency room in Miami-Dade, and they checked him in, they sent him from the emergency room, and they Baker Acted him, which is an involuntary hold in Florida. And they sent him to Plantation Hospital, which was a mental health facility. Jarvis was there about 9, 10 days, maybe 11. And his sister told him that his dad had died, so Jarvis wanted to go to the funeral. Mind you, Jarvis is in a mental health hospital. So Jarvis starts wandering up and down the halls, pushing to open the doors because he wants to leave. He thinks his sister is coming to pick him up. Maybe some truth to that. And so what does the mental health hospital do? They call the sheriff. Now, why is that kind of freaky? Because if the sheriff arrests him, where are they going to take him? To the mental health hospital, right? And so the sheriff gets there. Jarvis ended up getting shot like 32 times. He ends up throwing up again, not before the sheriff gets. In fact, they said he was wandering around and he was going to stab somebody with a pencil. And then when the sheriff got there, he threw the rack that was holding up the magazines up against the glass. It's not even glass. It's like in the elementary schools, it's like the plastic. And he had the plastic in his hands, and he was behind a closed door. He couldn't go anywhere. And the police opened the door, shot him with beanbags, missed, and then shot him 30 some odd times. Y'all had never heard about that case, of course. I mean, these cases happen all over, but they reinforce my point that many times not only are police ill-trained, but they're not trained for the situations they're in. And what we have to do is look at a holistic approach. We have to look at a holistic approach by the way that we train police officers. For example, in many states, it takes you longer to get a barber's license than it does to get be able to be a law enforcement officer or get a weapon or some of these other things. We just have to make sure that we're looking at the community as a whole. I love the way that Ryan frames it because every time he mentions a solution, he goes back to the fact that these dollars can be spent in the classroom, or these dollars can be spent on mental health, or these dollars can be spent, with all due respect to Marc Morial, I say the greatest mayor of all time was Marion Barry. You can't tell me Marion wasn't the greatest mayor of all time. Marion Barry had a summer work program. Marion Barry made sure that he took young people off the streets and he put them to work during the summer so they weren't idle. Just thinking outside of the box about how you rebuild a community, because respectfully, whoever your chief of police is, if you think he's the panacea, he will fail to meet that expectation.
Right.
He will fail both subjectively and objectively if you think they are going to fix that problem. And so I think we have to look at how we fix our community as a whole, but to your point, you have to have expectation as well. And we have to set firm expectations on what we expect he
Or she, or
to be
they.
able to accomplish.
Right.
I agree with that for sure. I think, I think that we just shouldn't, I think it's important, as Bakari mentioned, to have like expectations for what the police chief should do. I think that that's just not my personal role. I don't personally even want to invest my time and energy in that. I think it's important that we do have people in the community. I think that to me, that's what I would call a harm mitigation strategy, where we can try to reduce the amount of harm that the police department causes our communities, but I don't see that as a long-term solution. I think that it's necessary. I think that the work that people in our community who are advocating for a particular type of police chief one who's not racist, one who's willing to say our police department is white supremacist and has been for a long time. I think we need a police chief who will say those things. That seems like, I guess that's important. But for me personally, I try to think short-term and long-term, and I try to think about solutions that will be most beneficial in the long term, so that's just not somewhere where I would put my own energy. And I think Bakari's point is really important about thinking holistically about reimagining public safety. To me, there's a very clear distinction. I think some people say reimagining policing. I'm not trying to reimagine policing, I'm trying to reimagine public safety. And I think that the way to do that is to think holistically about how we achieve safety. And I think that when people want their children to come home safe, maybe their initial response, because they've been socialized to think so, is that they want more police on the street to help their children get home safe. But I think that in reality, what they actually care about is the safety aspect. And so I don't think that the police are the long-term way to achieve that community safety, because if we think about the safest communities, whether it's in Missouri, whether it's in the country, I don't think it's the communities where there's police on every single corner. I think it's the communities that are well-resourced, that have excellent educational programs, that have excellent after-school programs, that have all the resources, the mental health resources that people in the community need. To me, those are the communities. To me, those are the communities that are the safest, and not the ones where you have police monitoring and surveillance every single thing that people do. So I think that we have to take a holistic approach. I will let the other people who are interested in harm mitigation as it relates to the police chief do that work, and the work that I, as an abolitionist, and the other organizers who I work along with, we just direct our energy in different places, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all. So.
And if somebody asks, if people always like the examples, they're like, with what Ryan's talking about, if people want to see communities that actually work that way, all you have to do is go to the suburbs.
Oh, that's true. It's a true statement.
Well, I want to say thank you all for sharing your sentiments on this, and I know we are short on time, but I do want to open it up to see if we have a question or two tops from the audience. Please head forward to the mic right here.
And questions have question marks at the end of them. I just like to throw that out there to my audiences.
And since we won't have time to go through each panelist, if you could direct your question to one of the panelists on the stage. Your name, sir?
My name is Keith Brown, and really it's a simple question. What is your opinion of qualified immunity?
Oh, we got to limit it. So I didn't mean to jump out there like that. But you brought it up there. So you got to limit it. I actually think you should get rid of it because it bars a lot of people from getting access to the courtroom. Because all you have to do is, and it's so weird because all you got to do is say like, man, I had a reasonable fear, right? It's the weirdest thing ever. But if you think about not only families here in Kansas City, but you think about Terrence Crutcher, the family of Terrence Crutcher, who have not been able to get in the courtroom. And these cases happen all the time, so I'll have to remind you who Terrence Crutcher was, but he was 500 miles away from here in Oklahoma City. I think it's about 500 miles. And 300, sorry, give or take, I was rounding up. And Terrence was actually, there was a helicopter that was circling over, and Terrence was having a mental health crisis. He was walking away with his hands up. The police officer, the young lady, said that she was in fear of her life, and she shot him in the back, and he died, but we were able to see because of the helicopter. The crazy part about it is because of qualified immunity, the family was not able to bring a 1983 action, and most people, unfortunately, most black folk know what a 1983 action is now, a federal civil rights suit. It was insane. And now this same officer who shot Terrence Crutcher, ironically enough, in the county over from Oklahoma City, she now teaches law enforcement officers around the country how to cope with shooting people during the line of duty, right? And so it's kind of sick the way it works. Or Botham John, for example. Now, Botham has not had his day in court. You remember Botham? Botham was shot because the officer walked into the wrong. And so when you think about all the people who have been locked out of their day in court, what I like to say politically, because I try to make sure these things can actually get done, is we have to figure a way that we can limit qualified immunity and narrow it, because abolishing qualified immunity is what I want. It's just something that we'll probably never get to.
Let me jump in here, Bakari, because
Oh,
we
I didn't
have a
even see you
local.
over there.
Hey, I moved. I was over there. Now I'm over here. It's called magic. No, we have Naireen Stokes here. Stand up, Naireen. Let us honor you. Naireen is the mother of Ryan Stokes, who was killed in 2013 by a KCPD police officer, and just recently she had 2 cases and qualified immunity. You know about the case? Yeah.
Unfortunately, in the business that we're in, which is a sad business to be in, we hear about these cases often, and so my heart goes out to you, and we wish, and that's the hard part, that you tell these families, like, it happens, and the world pays attention to you, and everybody's at your doorstep and bringing you food, and then you file a suit, and then for a year, nobody hears about the case. And then 2 years goes on, and you're taking depositions, and then 3 years happen. And then maybe you get a mediation, maybe you get a settlement if it's bad enough, but if you don't, if it's 50-50 or even 40-60, or in many cases 25-75, they tee it up. Because they know they can take it to court, and they know in qualified immunity they can win, or even if they don't win, then they know they have a district or a court of appeals that they can take it to, and then you're 7 years down the road, and then you still end up with the result like you did. So when people talk about the system, it ain't broken. It works the way it's supposed to. And unfortunately, you were caught in that, and so my heart goes out to you.
We have a question right here.
Okay, 3 shorts. Marc, thank you for your comments. The question is about one of them. You referred to the pipeline of arms that are coming in. It's not just the pipeline of arms, it's also drugs too. How do you get federal, state, and local people to cooperate and I know you don't have the direct answer, on stopping this pipeline? Because that is one of the elements, and you don't have to answer now. The second one is minor. We have a number of elected, appointed officials who are supposed to be leaders of our community. How do we collaboratively get those people to truly lead the community so we don't have the crime problems? We vote them out? Is that what you said?
I know, I said good luck.
Good luck, I know. Third question is that you're talking about St. Louis, and we're appointing police boards who don't know what they're doing. How do we create an educational environment that when you say you're going to serve on a police board, whatever capacity that is, to understand what their task is? You've seen it. You can explain that. I can't.
So oftentimes, your best answer to tell you what's going on in the house is to ask the person that's living in it. Now, I don't know if you remember Ms. Grant, one of my first conversations with Ms. Grant was her reaching out and talking about the Ethical Society of Police. So the Ethical Society of Police is what I was a part of. It's an organization that was founded in 1972 to address race-based discrimination within the police department and how they handle cases with the community as well, right? The Ethical Society of Police has always been and will always be the entity that will sit there and tell you the dirty dog secrets on the inside and encourage people to say, hey, this is wrong. They will call foul play. Several people have come. There is even one of our Missouri State representatives that's sitting in the back here who has been one of the people who would even call as well and say, hey, help me understand. Help me understand how I can get through this problem. Really tell me what's happening. And so when you have people in police departments that A, are willing to speak up, and then two, well, B, I went from A to 2, but A, and then B, actually are supported when they do speak up for police officers, right? They will tell you everything it is that you need to know. They will tell you about but you got to seek them out though, too. And you have to make sure that they're protected. There's a number of times when people will speak out, police officers. There's been a number of cases where black police officers who speak out do not receive the same protection from the unions that they pay their dues to. Yeah. And so what we end up doing with the Ethical Society of Police is said, okay, that's fine. Guess what? We will provide representation to you then. We seek out our own lawyers. So when you do come up, I'm one of those people. It's not public right now. I'm one of those people that told on my police department, and I no longer work for that police department because I told. However, what I also did was make sure I had a lawyer friend who we have a legal contract with one another right now, right? So make sure you're supported, but it takes people like the Urban League, it takes people like the NAACP to come up behind those who tell and say, okay, no, you're not gonna mess with this person. But seek out those people in the police department to tell you everything it is that you know. Oftentimes, it's not going to be the chief, though, or anybody high up.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you. We only have a moment to take one more question, or I can each give you 1 minute each. I just want to make sure you have to ask their question, yes. So.
I'll take it, that 1 minute.
And then I want to make sure over here.
Okay. Well,
No, I want to hear your statement, so we'll give you 1 minute.
Okay,
And then
okay.
you go ahead.
Let me go first.
well, okay, let me go first. Okay. My name is David Collins. I lived here all my life. You know, I sued the Kansas City Police Department years ago, but it ended with my own lawyer telling me, sign the check or go to jail. And nothing happened. I got it on tape. So I took this tape. He told me, sign the check before the judge sent the sheriff that to your aid, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is crazy. My own lawyer. So I went to the police department with this information as evidence. They told me they were going to arrest me to this day. They said, if you file this report, we're going to send you to jail. So I'm like, if I was white, that never would have happened. But it's systemic racism, threats, and intimidation. That's what they use against us. And I'm outnumbered because I can call 100 lawyers and say, I ain't messing with that. I ain't going against that judge, that lawyer. But the thing is, how can we get a solution? Even the prosecutor.
Yeah. Well, let's take that question right there.
Okay, go.
Any of our panelists want to take that? How can we, get justice?
Yeah, I mean, how can they just get away with committing a crime blatantly when it's all in black and white?
So if there's any, I don't know if if there's any resources in here in Kansas City that you would recommend, or folks who are.
Yeah, maybe if you stick around afterward, and I might be able to get a little better detail so I can give you some resources. All right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank everybody. My name is Q Bay, but this is what something I want to just speak on. When the police, law enforcement is trying to solve something in the community, they have this secret line to where you can provide information without being known who you are. So I say that everybody know who the bad actors are on their job. So the police force, they say we got so many good officers, and why come the good officers don't use that secret line and report who them bad officers is if it's so secret?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I know I said I had a statement. I know I turned into a question. I apologize. But that's what I like to see. Now, some of these good officers, they always say we got good officers. Where they at?
They are self-identifying as good officers. That's why.
You know, one of the things.
I was just saying, Mr. Bay, I do have a case pending where a police officer told on another police officer.
But I just want you to know that one of the things that just happened is Merrick Garland just changed the guidelines whereby, just 2 weeks ago, it was a directive now that but it only applies to federal officers. I mean, it don't really apply to what happens here in the city of Kansas, or Kansas City. But I know, sorry, in Kansas City. But you now have to. Excuse me.
I'm just saying.
All right, Picard.
I want to make it out of here.
30 seconds, sir.
But it ensures that people now have to intervene. And so there is now a duty and a responsibility that you can't sit around and watch a bad actor act. And so what you have to do is make sure that those things happen on the state and local level.
Yeah.
And we are just about out of time, but I will say this, some of the panelists will be around and would love to take your question. We just have a hard stop, and I just want to make sure President Grant can come in.
Okay, I'm going to take the president's prerogative and read a question from I'm sorry, but we do want to include okay, well, let me just give us a second. We might be able to work it in. But I do want to acknowledge that we do have folks on the live stream, and there was one question that I did want to get in from the live stream. And basically, it was, it's about the FOP and the power of the FOP, and how do we get the FOP out of the control position that they're in City Hall and in the prosecutor's office. I don't know that they're in a position in the prosecutor's office, but I do know.
Sure as hell or not.
But they are in City Hall because they fund a lot of folks who are on the city council.
You're gonna have a really hard time. Nothing is ever impossible. The Fraternal Order of Police represents maybe about 300,000 officers in this country. I'm just telling you what it is. One thing you could probably start doing is your local favorite police officer that you have, your local favorite community police officer that take pictures shooting hoops with little black kids or something, and they saying that they're good, go ask them if they're a member of the FOP. Question them, and if they are, tell them stop paying their dues, and that's how you can start tackling.
So we have like 2 minutes, Mark.
Because
So-
this is an area that requires us to gain a closer understanding. So, in many states, what fraternal orders of police have done is go to the legislature and get statutes passed that create special rules for police officers who get in trouble. So once again, the state legislature, I know we repealed portions of the Police Bill of Rights in Louisiana in the 1990s. Number two, a fraternal order of police or a union, and I think these fraternal orders of police do not function like traditional unions, have a negotiated collective bargaining agreement. In this instance, they negotiate in Kansas City with who? The state board. In that collective bargaining agreement is where, in many instances, disciplinary procedures are embedded. A local control and local elected officials would put the mayor and the city council in charge of negotiating that collective bargaining agreement. This requires a greater understanding. We can't be throw our hands up and say there's nothing we can do. I'll give you my New Orleans example, which ended up helping. In 1979, when my father got elected mayor, the police struck on him right before Mardi Gras, his first year in office. The result of them striking is he broke the union. And they haven't had a collective bargaining agreement since 1979. So when I took office in 1994 and wanted to reform the department, I didn't have a union contract I had to deal with. So I had a freer hand to do things. We need, can't happen here, local elected officials who have the power to negotiate these agreements to stand up and not agree to things that limit accountability by police officers. So once again, I'm going to say this. We gotta be active in voting.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. The library has given me permission to allow you to ask your questions so that we can, because we promised we'd be done at 8,
Thank you,
8 o'clock, and
library.
it's 8 o'clock.
This will be real quick. Just to make a point, just like far as like going to the police department, parking control, I'll just give you a quick example. Parking control, in this area, there's plenty of parking control officers, 3, 4, 5, 6 cars. But once you go up north, there's absolutely nothing. The only time they go up north is when there's a abandoned car situation or somebody calls. That's the only time. But I can tell you the differences. I got so much, but I only got 10 seconds. But like I go to the VA and drop off specimens. Coming up Linwood to Indiana, there was a stop one night. So I went up to Linwood to Prospect. There was another stop. Had a few black guys sitting on the curb. And then went on up the street to 31st and right between Troost or whatever. There's another stop. So this is about 11 o'clock at night. I live up north. There's no police presence anywhere. You know why? Because all the police officers live up north. They live in the fancy houses and all that. Nobody, I think if you're a police officer, I think you should have not only live in the city, but also they pick people from all these villes. You got Boonville, Caneville, Carterville, Harrisonville. So how many black people lives in a ville? You know what I mean? So I'm sorry, but how many black people live in a ville? I think that the area they police, the people should look like the people that live there. And that's it. That's the bottom line.
Right. Thank you.
You're not
Thank
wrong.
you.
I
You're
agree
not
with him.
wrong. We agree.
One more thing, and I'll be quiet.
Keep it short.
The police department has been in existence since 1874. They got their very first police chief in 2011. And you telling me, I don't think the police department is racist. I think it's bigotry because racism, all racism is a race between who has the power and who has the control and the wealth and the resources. I don't think it's racist. I think it's a bunch of bigots, but it's not racist. Bakari, I love you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, thank you. Okay, so we are only like 1 minute over. I gotta wrap this up. Marc, we gotta do pictures, so don't sneak out. I'm trying to catch you. I saw you. Bring it on back down here. All right, so let's give this panel another round of applause. You were outstanding. Thank you so much. Thanks to the library for hosting this event. Thanks to Steve and Young and Winifred Jameson for helping us, and show up tomorrow night for the 2-year anniversary of Friday Night Protest. I meant to honor them earlier. Sorry about that, you guys. Thank you all so much for coming. We're done. Good night.